Hey Ollie, welcome to my podcast Beyond Limits. I'm really excited to have you on. Thank you very, very much for agreeing to join us and talk about talent and people and development today. So I'm really excited to have you. I know we had an initial chat and you had some really, really interesting points that I wanted to get you on and talk about, especially around kind of EVP and employee feedback. I think was really, really valuable, which is, really, really cutting edge, for lack of a better word, at the minute. In the sense of employees are so focused on keeping people engaged and finding out how they are and trying to improve employee well-being. So I thought that was really, really pivotal and important. So I'm glad you agreed to come on. I'm really looking forward to it. I think what we should do is start with just a bit of introduction from yourself, Holly. So if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're doing at the moment, and kind of, what you're involved in, that would be amazing, please.
Yeah, so I'm a talent acquisition advisor at Hedgehog Lab. I'm essentially the recruitment side of Hedgehog Lab. I sit on the people and culture team, so I get to kind of dabble in with all the fun stuff that we get to do at Hedgehog Lab, but my primary responsibility is taking on new employees and looking at the talent side of things. So there's usually quite a lot going on all at the same time, but I get to work on loads of different types of things, so it is a very fun role to have here.
A lot of variety.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. And when we spoke initially, one of the things that really jumped out that you mentioned was around kind of critical employee feedback, or however you might want to term that, kind of honest employee feedback, but also honest. And I think sometimes people struggle with that. I think we want to give honest feedback, but then sometimes people are concerned about hurting people's feelings and how will that affect the culture, and is somebody kind of going to go away from that meeting and say, oh, my manager's had a go at me, and then does it affect the team? So it's an interesting area, and I think a lot of people are really wanting to get that right, and rightly so. And then also there's the flip side of it. I think as employees or team members, people working as part of a team, I think there's a desire to receive, constructive criticism or feedback on performance. I think there's a real desire culturally at the moment for that, and I'm not sure we're doing it as well as we can. So just tell us a bit about that, because we spoke about that, and also you mentioned about how it's important, or that element of feedback is important to build a kind of transparent and open culture. So I'd be keen to hear a bit more about that.
Absolutely. I think a transparent culture comes from it starts with the psychological safety of your employees, essentially. You can ask for all the feedback you like, but if you don't provide that kind of safe space or platform for your employees, they're not going to be honest with you. I'm sure we've all worked in that kind of environment where your voice isn't going to be heard. So if they ask you to complete a survey, you're probably not going to be that honest with them in the first place. So I think to truly have an effective, transparent culture is all about what you do with that feedback once you've got the honest feedback. And I think that's quite imperative. So, for example, Surat, our CEO, will personally read and reply to any comments you leave on a pulse survey.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Especially if they are negative, and he wants to kind of dig a little deeper. I think by doing that, he's showing that he's actively listening to you and actively working towards those changes. I think he's interested in everything that you have to say, whether it's positive or negative. And I think it's also important to bear in mind that not all changes are going to be immediate if you put forward
Yeah,
a vision.
it's a good point.
But at least by putting it on the C-suite's radar is definitely a good place to start. So when we kind of ran a little bit of a project around our employee experience, a lot of the feedback that we got was important because it was away from the managers and away from the C-suite. So we handpicked employees that were able to provide a unique experience of Hedgehog Lab, where they might not be able to voice those opinions in other situations. So I think, like I said, providing that safe space and platform is really important.
So That's really interesting about the feedback from C-level. Did you? I mean, I don't know how new it is, but those recommendations or criticisms or suggestions of doing things a different way or improving things, have you then noticed in the business that has there been an active change then to actually make things better, and have employees seen that, and what's the response been to that, those changes?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest changes comes from projects. It's essentially what we do. So having a platform to voice those frustrations and seeing the changes is important for the wider business. So for example, one of the changes that they made from frustrations coming from projects is understanding why we've made certain business decisions. And we've now, Surat has provided a platform on our intranet where any big decision that he makes, he provides a reason why that they've made that decision and how it's going to affect everyone. So I think that.
And can employees feedback directly to that this you can right? That's interesting. I really like that.
Just bring it up, ask him.
Yeah.
See what you put that, but I don't really understand what that means. Can you explain it to me a little bit more? So he is really good at doing that, and I think it proves that it works because now everyone is happier with it because they understand it, and I think that's part of where the frustration comes from. Is if you don't understand a decision or why we're going in a certain direction, you're just going to get more and more frustrated by it.
Do you know what? I really agree with that, and I think that's part of anybody who's a people leader, really, to take people on that journey with them and together and collaboratively. So I think that's fantastic. Just probably moving on from that a little bit, but tied to it is, I'm just going to ask you around. I know currently you're working through, and you could probably tell us what stage you're at with this, but Hedgehog Labs currently building its EVP to attract talent. Now, I think sometimes people get a little bit scared by that because it's, where do I start? And, there's quite a lot to get together, and how we're going to position it to, externally. Tell us a little bit about that, how that's going, and kind of how you started that, and what stage you're at the minute, and what you hopefully trying to achieve by it.
Mm-hmm. So we have kind of kicked off an employee experience project where we are looking from an employee's journey at Hedgehog Lab, right from when they applied for a job or even heard about us, right until they leave the company.
Right.
And the people team have collaborated with our UX researcher team, and we've kind of shaped it as if it was a client research project. So it's very formalised, although the feedback sessions are quite relaxed because we're just talking to our colleagues. It's a full process as if we were going to do it for one of our clients, which I think is pretty cool because I've never been involved on a project before. So we have essentially wanted to answer a few questions. Now, they're not all directly linked to the employee value proposition, but they give us a good idea about it. So we're able to answer questions, kind of, do our values and behaviours match the day-to-day experiences at Hedgehog Lab? Are we all experiencing the same thing? What can we improve? What do people look forward to? What gives people the work dread? And all of those kinds of things. So there's a lot of data that we have that can be used for probably more than we ever realised. But to dissect it into the types of phases we've gone through and are currently still going through, we've kind of got phase one was the initial research, the kind of feedback sessions, the questionnaires, the interviews, all things like that. Phase two was the analysis, and phase three was the results, the opportunities and solutions. And with this, all of the data that we've collected is completely available for everyone at Hedgehog Lab. Not everyone was involved, but we are happy to share those results with everyone so that they can see what we're working towards and how their contribution is going to help shape Hedgehog Lab moving forward, which is quite exciting.
That's really exciting, and I think what I'm hearing from quite a lot of things that you mentioned is just that kind of collaborative approach, regardless of position in the business, responsibility. level, everybody's kind of works collaboratively and everybody's voice matters.
Absolutely. I think it also goes back to what I said before about providing that safe space. I think people were also just excited that we were asking these questions and getting their own personal opinion when they might not have been asked those kinds of questions before.
And that psychological safety bit, it's a term that's used a lot. It's something that I'm, a significant fan of, making sure that the environment, that people feel safe to be able to be creative, to be innovative. What does it mean to you, that psychological safety? Because as I said, it's a term that's used a lot.
I think it's quite a hard one to grasp and get right. Because I don't think I'd ever come across it before Hedgehog Lab. I'd come from a very corporate background, the kind of standard recruitment agency, and then before it was Weatherspoon, so it was very different. So I think psychological safety for me personally is somewhere that I don't feel afraid to voice my opinion, and I know that my opinion is genuinely valued. I know that if I was in a position where I wasn't happy mentally, my manager would do everything in her power to change that and make my day-to-day life better. Whether that be staying at Hedgehog Lab or moving on from Hedgehog Lab, I think she would support me no matter what.
Supportive. Yeah, it sounds like there's a value there for the people and the person, as opposed to an operational number, as it were.
Absolutely.
And just going back to what you were talking about the survey information for the employees and sharing that information and then making the changes in the EVP. Why do you think that's important, critical, useful for the growth of the business? Tough question there, isn't it?
I think it all stems from the brand, right? We can be sure about who we are, but how do we maintain that during a period of growth? And I think that can make you or break you sometimes. We need to keep up with our competitors. I think we stand out against smaller agencies because we've been around for a long time and our benefits are great. But now we're getting to the point where we need to compete with the bigger companies. So, for example, the first thing for me that comes to mind is there are a number of smaller companies that offer a remote first working from anywhere policy. And they've had that around for a while. But as soon as Airbnb and Spotify announce that they've got a work from anywhere policy, the internet goes crazy and everyone's applying for a job at Airbnb. So it's really interesting on how you get that balance. So I think the employer branding plays a really critical role in your EVP. But your EVP obviously comes from within. Everyone knows how competitive the tech industry is right now. But the tech world is incredibly connected as well. And I think our employee experience project showed that a lot of people had heard of Surap before they knew who Hedgehog Lab were. So I think one of the biggest players in that is Surap's LinkedIn. I don't know if you've seen, but he's very active on LinkedIn. And it's somewhere I always point candidates towards. I say, go and have a look at his LinkedIn. He talks about culture and where his priorities lie and what he thinks about leadership. And I think that's important for us. During the employee experience project, one of our UX researchers said that he felt like he knew Surap before he even joined the company, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, it is.
And definitely shows his kind of influence with that.
And it sounds like that you guys are really focused on making sure the inside of the organisation is a great place to work now. I know that every business, every organisation has its challenges and nowhere's perfect, but it sounds like you're really intentionally focused on making it a place that people feel valued and want to work there. I think one thing that people get frustrated at is when people brand their business as a certain culture, but actually when they join it's something different. Do you feel that what you've developed internally and what you're developing internally really marries up to what you're doing externally, and How do you feel that impacts the success of your business, I suppose?
I think this is an interesting one because a lot of people talk about how people can shout about culture on the outside, but then they get inside and it's actually really toxic. And
Yeah.
during our employee experience project, people said that we really do have the culture that we shout about. We not only talk the talk, but we walk the walk. And I think that surprises a lot of people. And I think it's really hard to do. And I think a lot of that comes from Surratt. I know I've been kind of singing his praises so far, but I think it has to come from the top down.
Yeah.
And I think the people team, my manager, our people and culture lead, she has a big part in that. And she's put in a lot of work to get us to where we are. But I think if you're not doing what's right on the inside, it's going to come and bite you on the arse after, because people are going to talk to their friends and say that's not really how it is on the inside. But I think it's something we get right, and I think it's something we might struggle with as we grow during this growth phase.
Yeah.
It's something we're going to have to keep an eye on. But I think we've got some good foundations to start with.
And where do you feel that kind of, you mentioned about people starting at the top and, you know, head of people and C-level. Where do you think kind of your values come into that? You touched a little bit as well on having that right foundation. Where do you think your the values in your business or leadership, or where does that come into play there really for building that great culture?
I think they're all kind of interlinked. So our values are create software people love. Our people are our greatest asset. Already those two kind of go hand in hand. We have to be passionate about what we're doing to create software that people love, to create those cool products. And I think that's really, really important. And I think if we shout about our values internally a lot, we always link back to them. They're presented on all of our monthly meetings and things like that. And I think as long as you're relaying that information internally, not just externally, it kind of just happens itself. And people know that. And I think it's just kind of what we stand for. It's the kind of saying that we have, be the hedgehog. Everyone we have here is the hedgehog. And it just kind of happens naturally, I think.
And I know when we spoke initially, we touched on that quite a few people have left Hedgehog in the past, gone to do other things, and then they've returned, which is, you know, a fantastic narrative or testimony, really. Why do you think that is?
I think it's an interesting one. It's something I'd never heard of before I came here either. And no organisation is perfect, right? And everywhere has something that they need to improve on, and sometimes those frustrations and pain points cause people to leave. But I genuinely believe that every organisation should be conducting exit interviews because you've got such valuable data right at your fingertips. We conduct ours the last week of their notice period, so I'm sure they're absolutely sick to death by the time it comes to their exit interview, and they're just going to be brutally honest with you because they don't think that they're coming back. So I think the important part of that exit interview is that as soon as it's completed, Surratt will read that exit interview. And it's happened before where he's read one and he's messaged me straight away asking about a certain process. How do we do it? Is this true? Let's change it now. Or if it's not something we can fix right now, let's create a plan to rectify that problem. And I think the other part of that is making sure that when employees leave, you kind of leave that door open. You want to maintain that relationship after. And I think the important thing with that is leaving that door open leaves that space and opportunity to show them that you've learned from a mistake and you've made a conscious effort to improve a process or the problem, and hopefully all the other members of staff no longer face that frustration if anyone else did. And obviously there's an argument that says that it shouldn't take someone leaving to fix a problem, but that's not always possible. And I think in a growing business like Hedgehog Lab, we're in a constant state of improvement, and I think that's what anyone can ask of us right now.
Yeah, it's interesting that, and we do exit interviews, consistently, and have done for some time. One thing that we did introduce about 6 months ago was, if our people and performance manager listens to this, she might shoot me, but I think they're called stay interviews. Can't remember what she told. She's probably created something more fancy than that for the name of them. But we started doing them about 6 months ago, and they've been really interesting. So, we pick an employee each month, and we ask them what they love about it and what they think could change. And they've been really insightful, actually. Just a different perspective, on people, why they like to stay here. So, yeah, that's been quite interesting for us. Just kind of tying some bits up here, really. The journey that you've been on, you've been involved in a lot of things by the sound of it, especially around, the EVP and attraction and employee voice. What advice would you give to somebody who's probably starting out on this journey and really wants to make a difference? They've got their values in place and they want to create a great organisation, but actually, where do I start? What pointers could you give to them, really?
I suppose there's kind of three main things that I would touch on with this. If there are any surprises when you kind of begin this journey, there's probably a problem. And I think, especially if you're sat on the people team or the HR team, you should already have a good idea about how your peers are feeling. It's probably easier for me to say because I work in a company that's around 60 to 70 employees, so it's quite easy to know who everyone is. But I think being on these teams, you should have a good idea about what your EVP is before you even get started. So even to find out what you personally think, what do you gain from working there? Because at the end of the day, even though you're conducting that research, your opinion is also important. I think secondly that you should use this as an opportunity to change and improve no matter what it is. Like I said, our employee experience project actually touches so many aspects that we never even considered. And I think, for example, even just providing employees that aren't usually heard that space to talk about things. Those people that are quiet usually actually have a lot to say.
Yes, good point. That's a really good point.
With our employee experience project, we're going to do the exact same, but for our clients. Because it works so well and we gained so much, we're going to do a client journey with Hedgehog Lab and what that looks like and what they think, which I think will be very, very interesting and probably a lot of work to do. And then I guess thirdly, this is quite a new one for me, but I recently attended a roundtable and they suggested that whatever you're planning on doing, don't ask your closest colleagues for their opinion. You should go to your most critical employees and ask them to completely tear your idea apart, because they're going to be the most honest with you and provide effective feedback.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, I never thought of doing that because I would always ask the people I'm closest to. But I think moving forward, I'm going to ask them to absolutely ruin my idea.
It's a real stress test in it, isn't it? I like that. And it's interesting because, I think that ties into that psychological safety you were talking about, because you can only do that if you feel that the environment gets you and is supportive and just wants the best. Also ties into that kind of, an environment which Patrick Lencioni talks about when he's talking about culture, is that once you have trust as a basis, psychological safety to some degree, that you feel free and comfortable to challenge each other, which I think is really important. And I was going to ask you actually on the kind of something you mentioned at the beginning about getting your EVP down, even if it is on paper or whatever. I think that's a really good bit of advice, because actually it doesn't have to be this high level, sophisticated, consultative thing. I was just going to ask your advice on that. Would you recommend doing that kind of collaboratively in a smaller group, or with a few people, or with people from a few different areas of the business at that initial stage?
I think it depends. We went round in circles about this, how best to even start. Should we do focus groups? Should we do kind of interview style? Should we just send out a survey? And I think it depends on your members of staff. You know them best. You know how to best get the best out of them. But I also think it depends what kind of questions you're asking. We chose to do individual feedback sessions. There was 3 of us in that session. 1 interviewer, 1 interviewee, and then 1 person taking notes. I think this worked best for us because we were able to kind of pull on certain things that they said, got them to kind of expand on things, and that one-to-one space was that safe space for them. We went back and forth on the focus groups because I think it depends. Some people wouldn't want to voice their opinion in front of other people.
Yes, good point, yeah.
But other people also thrive in that collaborative environment, so maybe picking certain types of people to do a focus group and certain types of people just do the one-to-one, that might work as well.
And just on that, you mentioned as well, which I think was a really important part, sometimes when we do have these meetings or collaborative events or, discussional points, if that's even a word, you often have the extroverts of the group. Well, you're like, this is great, we should do more of this, get a coffee machine, oh, that's not very good, you need to tell us more about this process, or the communication could be better, maybe we should use communication on video, and, all these suggestions start flowing out. And then, the quieter introverts who are probably a little bit more, take time to process things, but probably come out with some really high quality suggestions because they've actually thought it through. Don't necessarily get heard, and you touched upon that earlier when you were talking about that. How can you make sure that's consistent and that you are actually getting the voice of, some individuals whose personalities they're more processors, time to think, or they are a bit quieter. How can we leverage that, do you think?
I think that's a hard one, especially because there's only so much you can do, and if someone doesn't want to give that opinion, you can't really.
Yeah.
You
can't force it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you just have to try a number of different ways. Our pulse surveys are done only a certain amount of time, I think it's once a month, I think. We only have 5 questions, but the questions change each time. That's one way we do it. But then those questions could also get brought up in your one-to-ones with your manager. If they trust their managers, they might feel that is a safe space for them. I think this employee experience feedback session that we had with them was that safe space for some people that don't feel comfortable with their line manager. But I think as long as you encourage it and know that as long as you're honest and there's no repercussions, you should be okay.
Yeah, agreed. And again, just go back to it, it's a bit of a theme throughout what you've been talking about today. It is that culture where people feel safe to express their opinion, isn't it? There's almost the work that needs to go before that, before the surveys and getting the opinions, which is around making sure people feel comfortable that they can express their opinion. I probably I won't keep you too long because I could talk to you all day on some of these podcasts, but just your opinion really on from what you've seen, and you've talked about some of the previous environments you've worked in, what from your perspective makes for a really good culture. The people feel comfortable, they feel that they can come to work and produce their best work, that they feel like they can be themselves. One, two, several things do you think companies, leaders need to try and make sure is in place, especially people in your sphere, which, is that talent area, is that people area, it's critical. What's your thoughts on what kind of ingredients make that great culture?
I think, even though I touched on the culture coming from the top, I think if you have a dedicated people team, the culture should also kind of ooze from there. Us at Hedgehog Lab, we make ourselves very seen. We sit on the tallest tables in the office. We're probably the loudest in the office. And I think making sure that people know that they can come to us, we're very conversational, very informal. We shout the most on Slack, we talk the most on nights out. I think things like that, help the culture. I know a lot of our teams on projects like working with certain people, and they have their own little collaborative things that they do to work on projects, and they absolutely love it. Even just sitting on like a Teams call while they're doing some design work. I think aspects like that is important to encourage, and making sure that you have those socials in place for the team building, if that's what you want to call it. But making sure that people truly know who they're working with, so that they can bond over things, or bond even over the projects that went on prior, and they can laugh about it a year later and things like that.
Yeah, Ollie, I love that. Thank you. Just want a bit of a plug, and I hope this is all right. If anybody listening to this podcast, if you want to connect with Holly on LinkedIn, and if you have questions, please email me at jermaine.benjamin@transition-partners.co.uk. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? I want to say thank you, Holly, for coming on the podcast. You've been absolutely fantastic. I know you was a little bit nervous before, but you're absolutely cracking, and certainly give me some food for thought, but also hopefully add value to the people listening as well. So I just want to say massive thank you for coming on and sharing.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been good.
Cheers. All right, great stuff. Thank you, and thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you for listening to the Beyond Limits podcast. If you have any questions that we can answer at all on the podcast going forward, or if you would be interested in being a guest on the podcast, please email me directly at jermaine.benjamin@transition-partners.co.uk. Thanks again.